The golden sunlight of 1875 burned across the dusty main street of Valentine, Nebraska, as Catherine Turner clutched a handful of her chestnut hair, measuring its worth against her brother's life. The hot summer air pressed against her skin as she stood before the barber shop, her heart heavier than the mountains to the west. $20 for hair like that, the barber had said just moments earlier, eyeing her long tresses that reached the small of her back. "It's a fine color, miss. Wig makers in Chicago pay good money for hair that ain't been touched by dye." $20. The sum repeated in Catherine's mind like a prayer. $20 that would buy the medicine her 16-year-old brother James needed. $20 that might save him from the consumption that had already taken their parents 3 winters past. She took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. The last of her pride had evaporated 2 days ago when Dr. Fitzgerald told her James wouldn't last another week without proper treatment. Catherine had sold nearly everything of value. They owned her mother's silver hairbrush, her father's pocket watch, even the pearl earrings she'd been saving for her wedding day, should such a day ever come. Her hand trembled as she reached for the barber shop door. At 22 years of age, Catherine had faced many hardships since taking over her family's small homestead outside Valentine, but nothing had made her feel as desperate as this moment. "Miss Turner." The deep voice startled her, and she turned to find Kellen Thorne watching her from atop his horse, a bay stallion that stood at least 16 hands high. The cowboy's face was partially shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat, but she could still make out the strong lines of his jaw, now covered with 3 days' worth of stubble. His eyes, blue as a mountain lake, studied her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Mr. Thorne," she acknowledged with a small nod. She'd seen him around town occasionally, knew he worked for the big rancher Howard Caldwell whose land bordered her small homestead. Some said he was Caldwell's right-hand man. Others whispered he was a former gunslinger seeking redemption. Either way, he wasn't someone Catherine had much reason to speak with. "You planning on going in there?" he asked, nodding toward the barber shop. Catherine's hand instinctively went to her hair. "It's not your concern, Mr. Thorne." He dismounted in one fluid motion, tying his horse to the hitching post. Standing before her, he was tall, the top of her head barely reaching his shoulder. The summer sun had darkened his skin, and small lines crinkled at the corners of his eyes when he narrowed them, studying her. "Your brother's still sick?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. "How did you small town?" he said simply. "Word gets around, especially when Dr. Fitzgerald rides out to the Turner place 3 times in a fortnight." Catherine looked away, uncomfortable with the realization that her family's struggles were the subject of town gossip. "Yes, James is. He's not well. And you need money for medicine." It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway, her throat suddenly tight. $20. Kellen Thorne's gaze moved from her face to her hair and back again. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that looked remarkably like anger. "You're selling your hair." Catherine lifted her chin. "It will grow back. My brother might not." For a long moment, Kellen said nothing. Just stood there with his hands resting on his gun belt, looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. Then, without warning, he reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "Keep your beauty, Miss Turner," he said, his voice low and rough as he pressed the pouch into her hand. "I'll pay the doctor." Catherine stared at the pouch, feeling the weight of coins inside. "Mr. Thorne, I can't possibly—" "You can and you will." His tone left no room for argument. "Consider it a loan if your pride demands it. But why would you? Because no woman should have to sell parts of herself to save someone she loves." Something flickered in his eyes, a memory, perhaps, or an old pain. "Not when there are men with money to spare." Before she could respond, the door to the general store across the street burst open, and a man shouted Kellen's name. "Thorne, Caldwell's looking for you, says there's trouble at the north pasture." Kellen nodded to the messenger, then turned back to Catherine. "Go to Fitzgerald. Get what your brother needs." He moved to his horse and swung himself into the saddle with practiced ease. "And Miss Turner, yes, your hair." His expression softened just slightly. "It's the color of autumn sunrise, would have been a shame to lose it." With that, he tipped his hat and rode away, leaving Catherine standing in front of the barber shop with $25 in her hand, and the strange feeling that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't yet understand. Catherine didn't waste any time. She hurried down the dusty main street toward Dr. Fitzgerald's office, the leather pouch clutched tightly in her hand. The weight of it felt both like salvation and an unwelcome debt. Pride had always been the Turner family's downfall, her father used to say. Now here she was, accepting charity or a loan, as Thorne had called it from a man she barely knew. Dr. Fitzgerald's office sat at the quieter end of town, a tidy white building with green shutters and a small sign announcing his practice. The bell above the door jingled as Catherine entered, the familiar smell of antiseptic and herbs greeting her. "Catherine," Dr. Fitzgerald said, looking up from his desk. The elderly physician had been treating the Turner family since before Catherine was born. His kind eyes and gentle hands had brought both her and James into the world. "I wasn't expecting you today." "I have the money," she said, approaching his desk and carefully counting out the $20 for the medicine. "For James." Dr. Fitzgerald's eyebrows rose slightly. "I see. That's excellent news." He didn't ask where she'd gotten the funds, and Catherine was grateful for his discretion. "I ordered the medicine from Omaha after our last conversation, hoping you'd find a way. It arrived on yesterday's train." He stood, moving to a cabinet where he retrieved a brown glass bottle. "This needs to be given 3 times a day with food if possible. I'll ride out tomorrow to check on him, but with this treatment, I'm more hopeful than I was before." Catherine nodded, blinking back tears of relief. "Thank you, doctor." As she turned to leave, medicine clutched to her chest. Dr. Fitzgerald called out to her. "Catherine, your hair looks lovely today. I'm glad you didn't have to cut it after all." She froze momentarily, wondering again just how much the town knew of her desperate plans, before nodding and hurrying out the door. The 5-mile ride back to her homestead seemed shorter than usual, buoyed as she was by new hope. The small log cabin came into view as she crested the final hill, smoke rising from the chimney where Mrs. Oakes, their elderly neighbor who had agreed to sit with James, would be preparing a simple supper. "I've got it, James," she whispered to the wind as she urged her tired horse forward. "You're going to be all right now." Mrs. Oakes met her at the door, her weathered face breaking into a smile at the sight of the medicine bottle. "He's had a better day," the old woman said. "Even sat up for a bit and took some broth." Catherine hurried to her brother's bedside. James lay pale against the pillows, his once robust frame now thin and fragile. At 16, he was tall like their father had been, but consumption had whittled away at his strength, leaving him weak and hollow-eyed. His dark hair, so like her own, was damp with sweat, but his eyes brightened when he saw her. "Kath," he whispered, his voice raspy from coughing. "You're back early." "I got the medicine," she said, sitting beside him and brushing his hair from his forehead. "You'll be feeling better soon." James's gaze fixed on the bottle in her hand, then moved to her hair. "You didn't cut it," he observed. "I thought you said the barber." Catherine hesitated, unsure how to explain. "I found another way." "How?" His question was direct, his eyes suddenly suspicious. "Mr. Thorne from the Caldwell Ranch provided a loan," she said carefully, measuring out the first dose into a spoon. Kellen Thorne, James frowned. The one they say used to ride with those outlaws from Wyoming. Catherine's hand stilled. Those are just rumors, James. What does he want in return? He called it a loan. We'll pay him back when you're well and we can sell some of the harvest. She held the spoon to his lips. Now take this, and don't worry about Mr. Thorne. James took the medicine, grimacing at the taste, but his eyes remained troubled. Men like that don't just hand out money, Kath, especially not to women living alone. I'm not alone. I have you, she replied firmly, though his words had struck a nerve. What did Kellen Thorne want? Was his generosity truly as simple as he'd made it seem? And soon you'll be strong again, and we'll manage the farm together like we planned. James didn't look convinced, but he was too weak to argue further. After taking the medicine, he drifted off to sleep, leaving Catherine to wonder about the enigmatic cowboy and the debt she now owed him. 3 days passed, and with each dose of medicine, James grew stronger. His coughing fits became less frequent, and color returned to his cheeks. Dr. Fitzgerald visited as promised and pronounced himself satisfied with the progress. Keep him on the medicine for 3 weeks, he instructed. And make sure he rests, even when he starts feeling better and gets restless. Young men always want to be up and about before they are ready. Catherine was in the vegetable garden behind the cabin, gathering ingredients for supper, when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up. Her heart skipped a beat when she recognized Kellen Thorne's bay stallion, the rider's broad shoulders silhouetted against the setting sun. She straightened, brushing soil from her apron as Kellen dismounted and approached. His eyes took in the garden, the cabin, the mended fence posts, all evidence of her attempts to keep the homestead running without her father or a healthy brother. Mr. Thorne, she greeted him, suddenly conscious of her work-worn hands and the loose tendrils of hair that had escaped her braid. What brings you this way? Came to check on your brother, he said, removing his hat. Without it shadowing his features, she could see that his face was more handsome than she'd previously noted: strong jaw, straight nose, and those startling blue eyes. A small scar ran along his right cheekbone, a reminder that his life had seen violence. How is he? Much improved, thanks to the medicine. Catherine hesitated, then added, Thanks to you. Kellen nodded, seemingly uncomfortable with her gratitude. May I see him? The request surprised her, but she nodded and led him into the cabin. James was sitting up in bed, whittling a piece of wood, something he hadn't had the strength to do in weeks. He looked up as they entered, his eyes widening at the sight of Kellen Thorne in their home. James, Mr. Thorne has come to see how you're doing, Catherine said. Kellen approached the bed, studying the boy with an appraising eye. You've got some color back, he observed. Good. James straightened, his posture defensive despite his weakness. I understand I have you to thank for the medicine. Your sister would have found a way, with or without me, Kellen replied. But yes, I was glad to help. And what do you want in return? James asked bluntly, ignoring Catherine's shocked James. Kellen didn't seem offended by the question. Instead, he pulled up a chair and sat by the bed, regarding James seriously. I understand your concern. Man offers help, usually wants something back. That's the way of the world, especially out here. So what is it you want? James pressed. Your sister said you help her run this place before you got sick. James nodded cautiously. Pa left it to both of us when he died. How many acres? 50. We farm about half, the rest is for the livestock. Kellen nodded, looking thoughtful. That's a lot for 2 people to manage, even when both are healthy. Catherine stepped forward, suddenly wary of where this conversation was heading. We manage just fine, Mr. Thorne. I'm sure you do. Kellen's eyes met hers briefly before returning to James. but I've noticed your fence line is down in several places, and your barn roof needs patching before winter." "We'll get to it," James said defensively. "I'm sure you will. But in the meantime, I thought I might offer some help with the heavier work, in exchange for the loan." Catherine and James exchanged confused glances. "You want to work for us?" Catherine asked slowly. "I have Sundays off from the Caldwell Ranch. I could ride over, help with repairs, maybe plow that north field you haven't been able to get to." He shrugged as if the offer was nothing remarkable. "Seems a fair exchange." "Why would you do that?" James asked, still suspicious. Something flickered in Kellen's eyes, that same shadow Catherine had seen the day he'd given her the money. "Let's just say I've been in situations where someone else's help made all the difference. Sometimes a man needs to balance the scales." There was more to the story, Catherine was certain, but Kellen's expression made it clear he wouldn't elaborate further. "We accept your offer," she said before James could object, "but only until the debt is repaid." Kellen stood, settling his hat back on his head. "That's fair. I'll be by this Sunday sunrise." He nodded to James. "Keep taking that medicine, boy. Your sister needs you on your feet." With that, he left, the door closing softly behind him. Through the window, Catherine watched him mount his horse and ride away, his figure gradually disappearing into the gathering dusk. "I don't trust him," James said as soon as Kellen was gone. "Men like that always have an angle." Catherine turned from the window, troubled by her own conflicting feelings. "Maybe, but we do need help, and if he's willing to work to settle the debt, we'd be foolish to refuse." "And when the debt is paid, what then?" Catherine didn't have an answer. She only knew that somewhere beneath her gratitude and wariness, a small part of her was looking forward to Sunday morning. True to his word, Kellen arrived at sunrise on Sunday, his horse laden with tools and supplies. Catherine, who had been up since before dawn preparing breakfast, watched through the window as he unloaded lumber, nails, and a toolbox from his pack horse. "He came," James remarked, joining her at the window. Though still weak, he had insisted on getting dressed and sitting at the table rather than staying in bed. "Brought half a lumberyard with him, too." Catherine nodded, oddly pleased by this demonstration of Kellen's reliability. "I'll call him in for breakfast before he starts working." "It's the least we can offer." James gave her a knowing look that she pretended not to see as she went to the door. "Mr. Thorne," she called, "would you care to join us for breakfast before you begin?" Kellen looked up, seemingly surprised by the invitation. He set down the piece of lumber he was holding and approached the cabin, removing his hat as he reached the door. "Thank you, Miss Turner. That's kind of you." Inside, Catherine busied herself serving plates of bacon, eggs, and biscuits, grateful that her cooking skills were one area where she excelled. Her mother had taught her well before succumbing to the same illness that had nearly taken James. Conversation was stilted at first, with James watching Kellen warily across the table. But as the meal progressed, Kellen began asking practical questions about the homestead where the worst fence damage was, what crops they had planted, how many head of livestock they maintained. His knowledge of farming surprised Catherine. She had assumed his experience was limited to ranching. "You know a lot about crops for a cowboy," she observed as she poured him a second cup of coffee. A slight smile touched his lips. "Wasn't always a cowboy. My father had a farm in Missouri before the war. Smaller than this place, but we grew corn, wheat, some vegetables." "What happened to it?" James asked, his curiosity temporarily overcoming his suspicion. Kellen's expression darkened. "War came. Father joined up with the Union forces, never came home. Mother tried to keep the place going, but—" He shook his head. "By '64 we lost it to taxes and bad harvests." "I'm sorry," Catherine said softly, understanding all too well how quickly a family's fortunes could change. Kellen shrugged, but the casual gesture couldn't mask the old pain in his eyes. It was a long time ago. I was 17, old enough to make my way. He set down his coffee cup and stood. That's enough about the past. Daylight's burning and that barn roof won't fix itself. Throughout the day, Catherine found herself constantly aware of Kellen's presence on the property. She could hear the rhythmic pounding of his hammer as he repaired the barn roof, see his tall figure moving along the fence line as he replaced broken posts. Twice, she brought him water, watching as he drank deeply, his throat working, sweat glistening on his tanned skin where he'd rolled up his shirt sleeves. By mid-afternoon, the barn roof was patched, a section of fence mended, and Kellen had moved on to repairing the chicken coop. Catherine approached with a glass of lemonade, made from the precious lemons she'd traded eggs for at the general store the previous week. "You've accomplished more in one day than we could have in a month," she admitted, handing him the drink. Kellen accepted it gratefully, his fingers brushing hers in the exchange. "It's easier when you're at full strength. Your brother will be there soon with the medicine working." "Yes, but—" Catherine hesitated. "Even before he fell ill, we were struggling to keep up. Our father always hired help during planting and harvest, but since he died, we haven't had the funds." Kellen studied her over the rim of his glass. "It's hard country for anyone trying to make it alone, harder still for a woman and a boy." "We're not seeking pity, Mr. Thorne," Catherine said sharply. "And I'm not offering any," he replied, his tone equally firm. "Just stating facts. The Caldwell Ranch succeeds because Howard has 20 men working for him, one family on 50 acres. That's an uphill battle even for the strongest man. What would you suggest then? That we give up? Sell to Caldwell like he's been pressuring us to do?" Kellen's eyebrows rose. "Caldwell's been trying to buy you out," Catherine nodded, surprised he didn't know. "For months now. He wants to expand his grazing land, sends his foreman, Mr. Daniels, every few weeks with an offer. And you've refused." "This land is all we have left of our parents," Catherine said simply. "James and I were born here. We'll make it work somehow." Kellen was quiet for a moment, his eyes scanning the property with new interest. "Caldwell doesn't like being told no. If you've refused him multiple times, he might not stay polite about it." A chill ran through Catherine despite the warm day. "What are you saying?" "Just be careful. Watch for signs of trouble." He handed her back the empty glass. "And maybe think about getting a dog. Good alarm system, and they'll help with the livestock too." Before Catherine could ask more questions, James called from the porch where he'd been resting, watching Kellen work. His voice was stronger than it had been in weeks, but Catherine could hear the fatigue creeping in. "I should get him back inside," she said. "He tires easily still." Kellen nodded. "I've got about another hour of daylight. I'll finish the coop and be on my way." As promised, Kellen worked until the sun began to set, then packed his tools and prepared to leave. Catherine met him by his horse, a basket in her hands. "Some bread and preserves," she explained, offering it to him. "And a piece of the apple pie I baked yesterday. To thank you for your work today." Kellen accepted the basket, looking slightly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Part of our arrangement," he reminded her. "Even so, I appreciate it." Catherine hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind all day. "Will you come back next Sunday?" "If that suits you," he replied, securing the basket to his saddle. "There's still that north field to plow, and I noticed your water pump needs attention." "It does," Catherine agreed, relieved he would return. "Sunday, then." Kellen mounted his horse, looking down at her from the saddle. The setting sun cast a golden glow across his features, softening them. "Your brother's looking better already. You did right by him, Miss Turner." "Catherine," she said impulsively, You can call me Catherine. Something warm flickered in his eyes. Catherine, he repeated as if testing the sound of it. And I'm Kellen, not Mr. Thorne. Kellen, she echoed, feeling a strange flutter in her chest at this small intimacy. Safe travels home. He tipped his hat and rode away, the sound of hoofbeats gradually fading into the gathering dusk. Catherine stood watching long after he disappeared from sight, wondering at the unfamiliar emotion stirring within her. The following Sunday, Kellen arrived earlier than before, just as the first rays of sunlight streaked across the eastern sky. Catherine, who had been awake for an hour already, preparing a heartier breakfast than the previous week, heard his approach and smoothed her hair self-consciously before opening the door. "You're early," she greeted him, noticing he'd brought even more supplies than before. "Thought I'd get an early start on the plowing," Kellen explained, dismounting. "That north field will take most of the day." "I've made breakfast," Catherine said, suddenly shy. "James is still sleeping, but I could wake him, let him rest," Kellen said. "The boy needs his strength." He hesitated, then added, "Though I wouldn't say no to coffee before I start." Inside the cabin, Catherine poured coffee for them both, hyper-aware of Kellen's presence at her small kitchen table. In the early morning light filtering through the windows, she noticed details about him she'd missed before, a small nick on his chin from shaving, the way one lock of his dark hair fell across his forehead when he leaned forward, the calluses on his hands as they wrapped around the coffee cup. "How is the medicine holding out?" he asked after a comfortable silence. "Well enough. Dr. Fitzgerald says James needs another week's worth, but he's much improved already. Yesterday he walked all the way to the creek and back without getting winded." Kellen nodded, looking pleased. "Good. The sooner he's back on his feet, the better." He glanced around the cabin, taking in the neat but worn furnishings, the carefully mended curtains, the shelves of preserved foods Catherine had put up for winter. "You've done well, keeping everything going." "We manage," Catherine said, though the simple praise warmed her more than it should have. "It hasn't been easy, but this place was my parents' dream. I couldn't bear to lose it." "How long have they been gone?" 3 years this winter. The consumption took them both within months of each other. Catherine swallowed hard at the memory. "James was only 13, I was 19. The neighbors helped where they could, but you've carried the weight of it," Kellen finished for her. Catherine nodded, surprised at how easily she was sharing these things with him. "What about you? You mentioned your father died in the war, but your mother," a shadow passed over Kellen's face. "Gone 5 years now, pneumonia." "I'm sorry," Catherine said softly. "You were close. She was all I had for a long time." He set down his coffee cup, his expression closing like a door being shut. "I should get started on that field." Kellen worked tirelessly throughout the day, using the plow he'd brought and one of the Turner horses to break the tough ground of the north field. Catherine brought him water and a midday meal, watching with admiration as acre by acre, the untamed land was transformed into neat furrows ready for planting. James, stronger than the week before, sat on the porch for much of the day, observing Kellen's work with grudging respect. "He knows what he's doing," he admitted when Catherine joined him in the afternoon shade. "Pa couldn't have done it better himself." "He said his father had a farm in Missouri," Catherine reminded him. "He was raised to this work, same as us." James gave her a sidelong glance. "You're starting to like him." Catherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I appreciate his help, that's all." "Is it?" James's tone was knowing beyond his 16 years. "Because I've seen how you watch him, and how he watches you when he thinks no one's looking." "James Turner, that's enough," Catherine scolded, though her heart had begun to beat faster. "Mr. Thorne is merely repaying a debt. Once it's settled, he'll go back to his life at the Caldwell Ranch and will go on as before." James didn't look convinced, but he let the matter drop, turning his attention back to Kellen's progress in the field. As the sun began to set, Kellen finished the last furrow and led the tired horse back to the barn. Catherine met him there with a bucket of fresh water and a cloth to wipe the sweat and dust from his face. "You've done incredible work today," she said, handing him the cloth. "That field hasn't been touched in 2 years." Kellen accepted the cloth, wiping his face and neck before taking a long drink from the dipper she offered. "Good soil," he commented. "What are you planning to plant? Winter wheat if we can get the seed in time." "I could bring some next week," he offered. Caldwell has more than he needs stored in the granary. He'd never miss a few sacks. Catherine's eyes widened. "I couldn't ask you to steal from your employer." "Not stealing," Kellen corrected. "I've got credit with him for extra work. Could take it in seed instead of cash." The offer touched Catherine deeply. "That's very generous, but consider it part of repaying my debt," Kellen said, using the explanation that had become their comfortable fiction. Both knew his day of work had more than compensated for the $25 he'd given her, but neither mentioned this fact. As they walked from the barn to the cabin, where James had already gone inside to rest, Catherine found the courage to ask a question that had been on her mind. "Why did you really help me that day? In front of the barber shop?" Kellen slowed his steps, considering his answer carefully. "I've seen what desperation does to people, makes them give up pieces of themselves they can never get back." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "Your hair." "It wasn't just hair to me. It was a symbol of something." "Of what?" "Of all the things that get sacrificed when life turns hard. All the beautiful things that should be preserved, not sold off piece by piece." His voice had grown rough with emotion. "I couldn't stand by and watch it happen. Not when I had the means to prevent it." Catherine was stunned by his answer, by the unexpected poetry in his words. "You're not what people say you are," she said softly. A wry smile touched his lips. "And what do they say I am?" "That you rode with outlaws in Wyoming, that you've killed men." Kellen's expression turned guarded. "Some of what they say is true." "Which parts?" He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "I did some things I'm not proud of after my mother died. Rode with men I shouldn't have. But I never killed anyone who wasn't trying to kill me first." His eyes searched hers. "Does that change how you see me?" Catherine considered this revelation, measuring it against the man she'd come to know, the man who had saved her brother's life, who had worked from sunrise to sunset to help a family that wasn't his, who spoke of preserving beautiful things in a hard world. "No," she said finally. "It doesn't change how I see you." Something like relief washed over his features. "Good," he said quietly, "because I value your good opinion more than you might realize." They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings, until the sound of the cabin door opening broke the spell. James called out that supper was ready, and Catherine realized with a start that her brother had prepared the evening meal while she was with Kellen. "Will you stay?" she asked impulsively. "For supper?" Kellen hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." That Sunday supper marked a turning point. The conversation flowed more easily, with even James beginning to warm to Kellen, asking questions about the Caldwell ranch and life as a cowboy. When Kellen described the cattle drives to Cheyenne, the boy's eyes lit up with the adventure of it all. "Maybe I could do that someday," James mused. "See something beyond Valentine." "You need to finish getting well first," Catherine reminded him gently. "And we have the farm to consider." "The farm will always be here," Kellen observed. "A man should see something of the world while he's young enough to appreciate it." Catherine felt a flicker of alarm at the idea of James leaving, of being truly alone on the homestead. Kellen seemed to sense her concern. "Not now, of course." he added quickly. Maybe in a year or two when he's stronger and you've got things more settled here. The way he said, "You've got things more settled," made Catherine wonder if he imagined himself as part of that future scenario. The thought both thrilled and frightened her. As Kellen prepared to leave that evening, Catherine walked him to his horse, conscious of James watching from the window. "Next Sunday, then?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Kellen nodded, then hesitated. "Actually, I was wondering if I might call on you before then." "Wednesday evening, perhaps? I have business in town and thought I might ride out afterward." Catherine's heart skipped a beat at the formal phrasing. This wasn't about work or repaying debts. This was a proper call, the kind a man made when his intentions went beyond friendship. "I'd like that," she said, hoping her voice didn't betray her excitement. A smile, the first full, genuine smile she'd seen from him, transformed his face, making him look younger, almost boyish. "Wednesday, then." As he rode away, Catherine hugged herself, feeling a strange mix of joy and trepidation. Something was beginning between them, something that went beyond gratitude or obligation, something that might lead to happiness or heartbreak, she wasn't yet sure which. Wednesday couldn't come quickly enough for Catherine. She found herself counting the hours, going about her chores with an anticipation that made even the most mundane tasks seem lighter. James noticed the change in her, teasing gently about her preparations for Kellen's visit. "You've cleaned that already," he pointed out as she polished the silver candlesticks that had been a wedding gift to their parents. "And changed your dress twice. Anyone would think the president was coming to call, not just a cowboy." "He's not just a cowboy," Catherine protested, then blushed at her brother's knowing smile. "I mean, he deserves our best hospitality after all he's done for us." "MMHMM," James hummed skeptically. "And I suppose that's why you're wearing Ma's cameo too, for hospitality's sake." Catherine's hand flew to the small brooch pinned at her collar. It was one of the few pieces of jewelry she hadn't sold to pay for medicine, too precious in sentimental value to part with. "Is it too much?" she asked anxiously. James's expression softened. "No, Kath, you look beautiful." "If Thorne doesn't see that, he's blind as a cave bat." The sound of approaching hoofbeats sent Catherine's heart racing. She moved to the window, watching as Kellen rode up to the cabin. He had dressed for the occasion as well, she noted with pleasure. His usual work clothes had been replaced by a clean white shirt, dark vest, and what appeared to be new denim trousers. His hair was freshly trimmed, his face clean-shaven. James gave Catherine's shoulder a supportive squeeze before retreating to his bedroom, affording them some privacy. "Don't worry," he said with a wink. "I'll make enough noise that you'll know I'm still here. No need for a chaperone when the walls are this thin." "James," Catherine gasped, scandalized, but her brother just laughed and closed his door. When Kellen knocked, Catherine took a steadying breath before opening the door, hoping her nervousness wasn't obvious. "Evening," Kellen greeted her, his eyes taking in her appearance with clear appreciation. "You look lovely, Catherine." "Thank you," she replied, feeling her cheeks warm. "Please come in." Kellen removed his hat as he stepped inside, revealing neatly combed hair still damp from washing. In his free hand, he held a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I brought something for you," he said, offering it to her somewhat awkwardly. "And for James, too." Catherine accepted the package, touched by the gesture. "You didn't have to bring anything." "I wanted to." He watched as she carefully unwrapped the parcel to reveal a book, a collection of Mark Twain stories, and a small sack of hard candies. "The book's for both of you, though I thought James might especially enjoy it." "The candies?" "Well, I remembered you mentioned having a sweet tooth." The thoughtfulness of the gifts, that he had remembered such a small detail about her preferences, made Catherine's heart swell with emotion. "This is so kind of you, Kellen. We'll treasure both." They settled in the small sitting area, Catherine serving coffee and some apple tarts she'd baked that afternoon. The conversation flowed easily between them, moving from the mundane topics of weather and town gossip to deeper subjects. "I saw Caldwell today," Kellen mentioned as the evening progressed. "He was asking questions about your place." Catherine tensed. "What kind of questions?" "Wanted to know if I'd been out this way, if I'd noticed anything about the condition of your farm." Kellen's expression grew serious. "I think he's getting impatient about buying you out." "What did you tell him?" "That I hadn't been paying attention." Kellen leaned forward. "Catherine, be careful with Caldwell. He's not a man who takes refusal well." "We've managed so far," Catherine said, though a thread of worry wove through her words. "His foreman, Mr. Daniels, can be insistent, but he's never been threatening." "Daniels is the face Caldwell shows to the public," Kellen explained. "But there are other men who do his dirty work when politeness fails." "Men like you?" Catherine asked before she could stop herself. Kellen didn't flinch from the question. "Once, perhaps. Not anymore. That's why I'm warning you. I know how men like Caldwell operate." "What should we do?" "Keep refusing him if that's what you want, but be vigilant. And—" He hesitated, then continued, "Consider letting me help you more, not just on Sundays. I could speak with Caldwell about reducing my duties at the ranch, spend more time here." The offer hung in the air between them, its implications clear. This would go beyond their original arrangement, beyond repaying a debt. This would be a commitment of sorts. "Why would you do that?" Catherine asked softly. "You've more than repaid what you gave me for James's medicine." Kellen held her gaze, his blue eyes intense. "I think you know why, Catherine." Her heart pounded in her chest. "I need you to say it," she whispered. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, smell the clean scent of soap on his skin. "Because I care for you. More than I should, perhaps, given my past and your situation. But I can't seem to help myself." Catherine's breath caught in her throat. "I care for you too," she admitted, her voice barely audible. For a moment it seemed he might kiss her. His gaze dropped to her lips and he leaned forward slightly. But then, from James's room, came the exaggerated sound of a book dropping and a chair scraping across the floor, a reminder of his presence. Kellen drew back, a rueful smile touching his lips. "Your brother has good timing." "Or terrible timing," Catherine replied with a small laugh. Her cheeks flushed. The remainder of the evening passed in a pleasant haze for Catherine. They talked of books they'd read, places they'd seen or hoped to see one day, dreams they'd held and lost and found again. When it came time for Kellen to leave, she walked him to the door, acutely aware of the invisible barrier that had been crossed between them. "May I call on you again?" he asked, standing on the porch, his hat in his hands. "Perhaps take you into town on Saturday. There's a social at the church." The idea of being seen publicly with Kellen, of acknowledging to the town that there was something between them, made Catherine both nervous and excited. "I'd like that," she said, "though I'll need to see if Mrs. Oakes can sit with James." "Of course." Kellen hesitated, then reached out to take her hand. His touch was warm, his calloused palm a reminder of the day's work he'd done. "Thank you for this evening, Catherine." "Thank you for the gifts," she replied, "and the warning about Caldwell." Kellen nodded, his expression turning serious again. "Just be careful. If anything seems wrong, anything at all, send word to me at the ranch." With that, he squeezed her hand once more before releasing it, settling his hat on his head and mounting his horse. Catherine watched him ride away, her hand still tingling from his touch, her heart full of newfound hope. The next few days passed in a blur of anticipation for Catherine. She sent a note to Mrs. Oakes, who happily agreed to sit with James during the church social. Though her brother insisted he was well enough to be left alone, Catherine wasn't taking any chances with his still fragile health. On Saturday morning, Catherine rose before dawn, bathing with the special lavender soap she saved for special occasions. She carefully ironed her best dress, a blue calico with white piping that her mother had sewn for her 19th birthday. It was slightly out of fashion now, but it was the finest thing she owned, and the color, James always said, made her eyes look like the summer sky. "You're fussing more than a hen with one chick," James teased as he watched her check her appearance for the third time. "Thorne already thinks you're beautiful. You don't need to try so hard." "Did he say that?" Catherine asked, unable to hide her eagerness. "That he thinks I'm beautiful?" James rolled his eyes. "He doesn't need to say it. It's written all over his face whenever he looks at you." He sat on the edge of his bed, looking more serious. "Kath, are you sure about this? About him?" Catherine turned from the small mirror to face her brother. "What do you mean?" "People will talk. Kellen Thorne has a reputation in these parts, deserved or not, and you're—" He hesitated. "I'm what? You're respected. The daughter of Thomas and Alina Turner. People admire how you've kept this place going, how you've taken care of me. Getting involved with Thorne might change how folks see you." Catherine considered her brother's words. He wasn't wrong. Valentine was a small town with a long memory. Kellen's past, whatever the full truth of it might be, would raise eyebrows when paired with her own relatively unblemished reputation. "I can't live my life worrying about what others think," she said finally. "Kellen has been nothing but honorable towards us. He saved your life, James. And he's shown me more kindness and understanding than anyone since Mother and Father died." James studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Just be careful with your heart, that's all. I don't want to see you hurt." "I will be," Catherine promised, touched by her brother's concern. The sound of an approaching wagon drew their attention to the window. Kellen had arrived, driving a smart two-seat buggy rather than riding horseback. Catherine's heartbeat quickened at the sight of him in his Sunday best dark coat, crisp white shirt, and a string tie. He'd even polished his boots to a high shine. "Well, would you look at that?" James said with grudging approval. "Cowboy cleaned up real nice for you." Kellen helped Catherine into the buggy with a gentleness that belied his strength, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. Mrs. Oakes had already arrived to sit with James, waving them off with a knowing smile that made Catherine blush. As they drove toward town, Catherine was acutely aware of Kellen beside her, of the occasional brush of his arm against hers as he guided the horses. The day was perfect, clear blue sky, gentle breeze, the countryside lush with late summer growth. "You look beautiful," Kellen said after they'd gone a mile in comfortable silence. "That color suits you." "Thank you," Catherine replied, smoothing the fabric of her skirt. "You look very handsome yourself. I hardly recognized you without your cowboy hat and trail dust." He chuckled, the sound warming her. "Don't get used to it. Can't work cattle in a string tie." "No, I suppose not." Catherine hesitated, then asked, "Are you sure about this?" "Being seen with me in town, people will talk." Kellen glanced at her, his expression serious. "Let them talk. I'm not ashamed of being seen with you, Catherine. Quite the opposite." His voice softened. "The question is, are you comfortable being seen with me?" "Of course," she said quickly. I know your reputation in Valentine is complicated." "That's one way of putting it." Kellen's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "I've done things I'm not proud of, Catherine. I won't pretend otherwise, but the man I was then isn't the man I am now." "I believe that," Catherine said softly. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't." His expression relaxed, gratitude evident in his eyes. "That means more to me than you know." As they approached Valentine, the street became busier with others heading to the church social. Wagons and buggies lined the main street, and people in their Sunday finest gathered on the church lawn where tables had been set up with food and drink. Catherine felt the curious stares as Kellen helped her down from the buggy. Mrs. Prescott, the shopkeeper's wife, nearly dropped her plate of cookies at the sight of them together. Mr. Jenkins, the town banker, frowned disapprovingly, but Reverend Miller greeted them warmly, seeming genuinely pleased to see Kellen at a church function. "Miss Turner, Mr. Thorne," he said, shaking both their hands. "Wonderful to see you both. How is young James recovering?" "Much improved, Reverend, thank you," Catherine replied. "The medicine has worked wonders." "God's grace manifests in many ways," the Reverend said with a meaningful glance between them. "Sometimes through the kindness of others." As they moved through the gathering, Catherine was touched by how protective Kellen was, staying close to her side, his hand occasionally resting lightly on her back as he guided her through the crowd. Despite the whispers and stares, he maintained his dignity, greeting everyone politely, even those who barely acknowledged him in return. They were sampling Mrs. Harrison's famous apple cider when Howard Caldwell approached, his imposing figure parting the crowd like Moses at the Red Sea. The rancher was in his 50s, broad-shouldered and barrel-chested, with a thick gray beard and cold eyes that missed nothing. "Thorne," he said in greeting, his gaze moving from Kellen to Catherine. "Miss Turner, this is unexpected." "Mr. Caldwell," Kellen replied evenly. "Fine day for a social, indeed." Caldwell's attention fixed on Catherine. "I've been meaning to speak with you, Miss Turner, about your property." Catherine stiffened. "My brother and I have made our position clear to Mr. Daniels, sir. The farm is not for sale." "Everything has a price," Caldwell said with a dismissive wave. "I'm prepared to raise my offer, significantly." "It's not about the money, Mr. Caldwell." Catherine felt Kellen's supportive presence beside her, giving her courage. "That land is our heritage, our future." Caldwell's eyes narrowed, flicking between her and Kellen. "I see. Well, perhaps you should reconsider. A young woman alone, farming is a hard life. Unpredictable things happen." The veiled threat hung in the air. Catherine felt Kellen tense beside her. "Miss Turner isn't alone," Kellen said, his voice low and even. "And she's more capable than most men I know." Caldwell's gaze hardened as it returned to Kellen. "Interesting. I wasn't aware your duties at my ranch included advising neighboring properties." He stepped closer to Kellen. "Remember who pays your wages, Thorne." "I remember everything, sir," Kellen replied, the words carrying a weight beyond their surface meaning. For a tense moment, the two men stared at each other, an unspoken battle of wills. Then Caldwell smiled coldly. "Enjoy the social," he said, tipping his hat to Catherine before walking away. Catherine released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That was unpleasant." "That was a warning," Kellen corrected, his expression grim. "Caldwell doesn't like what he's seeing between us." "Why should he care?" "Because you've refused to sell to him, and now his hired gun is courting you." Kellen's use of the term courting sent a thrill through Catherine despite the seriousness of the situation. "He sees it as a betrayal." "What will you do?" Catherine asked, suddenly worried about Kellen's position at the ranch. "Nothing changes," Kellen said firmly. "I'll continue working for Caldwell and I'll continue seeing you. If he doesn't like it, he can find himself another foreman." Catherine's eyes widened. "You'd risk your job." Kellen took her hand, unconcerned with who might be watching. "Some things are worth the risk, Catherine." The remainder of the social passed more pleasantly, with Kellen and Catherine joining in the dancing, sharing a meal at one of the tables, and conversing with the few townspeople brave enough to approach them, despite Caldwell's obvious disapproval. By the time they left, the sun was beginning to set. casting a golden glow across the prairie. On the drive back to the Turner farm, they talked freely about their feelings for one another, the barriers they faced, and the uncertain future ahead. When Kellen stopped the buggy in front of the cabin, Catherine found herself reluctant for the day to end. "Thank you for today," she said softly as he helped her down. "Despite Caldwell, it was wonderful." "It was," Kellen agreed, still holding her hands in his. "Catherine, I want to be clear about my intentions. I care for you deeply. More than I thought possible after everything I've seen and done. If you'll have me, I'd like to continue calling on you, properly." Catherine's heart soared at his words. "I'd like that very much." In the fading light, with the purple shadows of dusk gathering around them, Kellen leaned down and gently pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was tender, almost reverent, his hand coming up to lightly touch her cheek. When they parted, Catherine felt as though something fundamental had shifted within her, like puzzle pieces finally falling into place. "I should go in," she whispered, though she made no move to leave his embrace. "James will be wondering." "I'll see you tomorrow," Kellen promised. "Sunday." "As usual." "As usual," Catherine repeated, smiling at how their arrangement had evolved from a business transaction to something so much more meaningful. With one final kiss, quick but full of promise, Kellen helped her up the porch steps. Catherine watched him drive away, her fingers touching her lips where she could still feel the warmth of his kiss, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Catherine's happiness lasted until the next morning, when she went to the barn to milk the cow and found the door hanging off its hinges, splintered as if someone had taken an axe to it. Inside, the cow was gone, along with their 2 horses. The chicken coop had been destroyed, the birds either stolen or scattered. "James," she cried, running back to the cabin. "James, wake up!" Her brother stumbled from his bedroom, alarmed by her panic. "What is it? What's happened?" "Someone's taken the animals," Catherine gasped, fighting back tears of shock and rage. "The barn's been damaged, the coop is destroyed." James's face paled. "Caldwell," Catherine nodded grimly. "It has to be. This is his warning." "We should go to the sheriff," James said, already reaching for his clothes. "And say what? We have no proof it was Caldwell's men." Catherine paced the small room, her mind racing. "Even if it was, Sheriff Davis won't cross him. Caldwell practically owns this town." "Then we'll handle it ourselves," James declared with all the bravado of his 16 years. "I'm nearly well now. I can help rebuild. We'll start over." Catherine looked at her brother, still thin from his illness, dark circles under his eyes despite his improving health, and felt a surge of protective love. "We need help, James. I'll send word to Kellen." "He works for Caldwell," James reminded her, though without the suspicion he might have shown weeks earlier. "This puts him in a difficult position." "I know," Catherine said softly, "but I trust him." Catherine wrote a brief note explaining what had happened, and sent James to deliver it to their nearest neighbor, Mr. Peterson, who was heading into town that morning. By noon, Kellen had arrived, his expression darkening as he surveyed the damage. "Caldwell's men, no doubt," he said after a careful inspection of the broken barn door. "This is Bill Harker's work. He always goes for the hinges first." "You know who did this?" James asked, incredulous. Kellen nodded grimly. "Caldwell has 3 men he uses for this kind of thing. Harker, Simmons, and Lowell. Mean as rattlesnakes, all of them." "What can we do?" Catherine asked, wrapping her arms around herself. The violation of their property, the loss of their livestock, had left her feeling vulnerable in a way she hadn't since her parents' deaths. "First, we secure what's left," Kellen said decisively. "Then we start rebuilding. I'll help you find replacement animals." He hesitated, then added, "and I'll speak to Caldwell." "No," Catherine protested immediately. "That could make things worse, and he might fire you. Let him try, Kellen replied, his jaw set. He needs to understand that this kind of intimidation won't work. And if it gets worse, James asked, voicing the fear Catherine couldn't bring herself to articulate. What if next time they don't stop at the animals and the barn? Kellen's expression hardened. Then I'll handle it, but it won't come to that. He turned to Catherine, his voice softening. I won't let anything happen to either of you, I promise. The conviction in his voice reassured her somewhat, but Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that by involving herself with Kellen, she had inadvertently escalated the conflict with Caldwell. The rancher now saw her not just as a stubborn obstacle to expanding his property, but as someone who had lured away one of his most valuable men. Over the next several days, Kellen spent every available moment at the Turner farm, helping to repair the damage and secure the property. He brought lumber from town, mended the barn door, rebuilt the chicken coop, and even managed to recover a few of the scattered chickens. Through connections in town, he located a milk cow for sale and negotiated a fair price, paying for it himself despite Catherine's protests. Consider it a loan, he said, echoing his words from their first meeting. Or better yet, consider it an investment in our future, our future. The words hung between them, full of promise and uncertainty. Catherine wanted to believe in that future, but the shadow of Caldwell's threat loomed large. A week after the incident, Kellen arrived at the farm with news. He had spoken to Caldwell, confronting him about the attack on the Turner property. The rancher had denied any involvement, of course, but Kellen had made it clear that his continued employment at the ranch depended on there being no further incidents. He won't fire me, Kellen explained as they sat on the porch that evening, watching the sunset. Good foremen are hard to find, and I know too much about his operation for him to let me go easily. But he could make your life difficult, Catherine pointed out, or worse. Kellen shrugged. I've faced worse odds. He took her hand, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. Catherine, I've been thinking about the future, about us. Her heart quickened. What about us? I've saved some money over the years. Not a fortune, but enough to make a start somewhere. We could leave Valentine, find a place where Caldwell's influence doesn't reach. The idea of abandoning the land her parents had worked so hard for made Catherine's chest tighten. This is our home, Kellen. I can't just give up. I'm not suggesting you give up, he clarified. Just that we consider all options. Your safety and James's is what matters most to me. And what about your safety? Catherine asked, moving closer to him on the porch swing. Caldwell isn't a man who forgives easily. I can take care of myself, Kellen assured her. I've done it for a long time. Catherine studied his profile in the fading light, the strong lines of his face, the determination in his eyes. In the weeks since he'd stopped her from selling her hair, she had come to know him as a man of principle and compassion, a man whose past mistakes had shaped but not defined him. A man she was falling in love with, despite the complications and dangers their relationship entailed. Whatever we decide, she said softly, we decide together. I won't have you sacrificing everything for us. Kellen's expression softened as he turned to her. It wouldn't be a sacrifice, Catherine. It would be a choice, the best choice I've ever made. He leaned in to kiss her, a tender meeting of lips that deepened as she responded, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. In his arms, the fears and uncertainties of their situation receded, replaced by a certainty that together, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The following Sunday, as they sat together at the dinner table, Kellen, Catherine, and a much-improved James, the sound of approaching riders broke the peaceful atmosphere. Kellen was on his feet instantly, moving to the window with a fluid grace that reminded Catherine of his more dangerous past. Caldwell, he said grimly, and he's brought company. Catherine joined him at the window, her heart sinking at the sight of Howard Caldwell leading a group of 5 men toward the cabin. She recognized Daniels, the foreman, and beside him, 3 rough-looking cowboys who she suspected were Harker, Simmons, and Lowell, the men Kellen had identified as Caldwell's enforcers. "Stay inside with James," Kellen instructed, reaching for his gun belt which hung by the door. "Kellen, no," Catherine protested, gripping his arm. "There are 6 of them." "I'm just being cautious," he assured her, though his eyes had taken on a hardness she hadn't seen before. "This is a conversation, not a gunfight. Not yet, anyway." James had joined them, his young face set in determined lines. "I'm coming out too," he declared. "This is my home as much as Catherine's." Kellen assessed the boy for a moment, then nodded. "Stay behind me, both of you." The 3 of them stepped onto the porch just as Caldwell and his men reached the front of the cabin. The rancher remained mounted while the others dismounted, spreading out in a half-circle that made Catherine's skin crawl with unease. "Thorne," Caldwell acknowledged coldly. "Miss Turner." "Young Mr. Turner." "Caldwell," Kellen replied evenly. "This is an unexpected visit." "Is it? I thought I'd come see what's been keeping my foreman so busy these past weeks." Caldwell's gaze swept over the repaired barn, the new chicken coop, the small garden where Catherine had recently planted fall vegetables. "Seems you've been quite industrious, on my time." "It's my day off," Kellen pointed out. "What I do with it is my business." "Is it?" Caldwell dismounted slowly, handing his reins to Daniels. "When a man works for me, his loyalty is supposed to be to me, not to some homesteader's daughter who refuses to see reason." Catherine felt her cheeks burn at the dismissive tone, but Kellen's hand on her arm kept her from responding. "My work for you hasn't suffered," Kellen said. "The cattle are moved to the south pasture, the fence line is repaired, and the tally for the Cheyenne Drive is complete. My loyalty to your ranch is demonstrated by my work, not by who I choose to spend my time with." Caldwell's expression darkened. "And yet here you are, helping the very people who stand in the way of my expanding the ranch. The very expansion you helped plan, if I recall correctly." "Plans change," Kellen said simply. "The Turners have a right to keep their land." "Rights," Caldwell scoffed. "Rights don't mean much out here, Thorne. You know that better than most." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I know about Wyoming, boy, about what happened in Laramie. How many men was it? 4, 5, Catherine felt Kellen stiffen beside her, though his expression remained impassive. "Ancient history," he said flatly, "and irrelevant to the present situation." "Is it?" Caldwell smiled unpleasantly. "I wonder if Miss Turner knows all about your ancient history, about the bounty that's technically still on your head in Wyoming territory." James gasped slightly, and Catherine fought to keep her own expression neutral. A bounty. Kellen had admitted to riding with outlaws, to having done things he wasn't proud of, but he'd never mentioned a bounty. "Say what you came to say, Caldwell," Kellen demanded, his patience clearly wearing thin. "These intimidation tactics won't work." Caldwell studied him for a long moment, then turned his attention to Catherine. $5,000, he said. "That's my final offer for this property." 5 times what it's worth. Take it and go somewhere else. Start fresh. Catherine met his gaze steadily. "My answer remains the same, Mr. Caldwell. This land is not for sale at any price." "I suspected as much," Caldwell sighed, as if genuinely disappointed. "Very well." He turned back to Kellen. "Thorne, you're fired. I want you off my property by sundown. Whatever wages are owed to you will be sent to the bank." Kellen nodded, seeming unsurprised. "That's your right." "And one more thing," Caldwell added, his voice hardening. "I've sent a telegram to the authorities in Laramie. Informed them that a wanted man is living in Valentine, Nebraska. I suspect they'll be sending someone to investigate." Soon. Catherine's blood ran cold at the threat. Beside her, James moved closer, his young face a mixture of fear and anger. "You'd bring the law down on a man for no reason other than spite?" the boy asked, his voice cracking slightly. Caldwell smiled coldly. "Business, son, not spite, though I won't deny there's some satisfaction in it." He returned his attention to Kellen. "You have a choice, Thorne. Leave Valentine and Miss Turner behind, and I'll send another telegram saying I was mistaken. Stay and face whatever comes." With that, he turned, remounted his horse, and with a nod to his men began riding away. Daniels and the others followed, though one of them, a man with a jagged scar across his cheek, glared at Kellen with naked hatred before turning his horse. When they were out of earshot, Catherine turned to Kellen, her heart pounding. "A bounty? In Wyoming?" Kellen's expression was grim. "Like I said, ancient history. But yes, there was trouble in Laramie 5 years ago." "What kind of trouble?" James asked, his earlier admiration for Kellen now tempered with wariness. Kellen sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I was riding with a group of men. We were hired to protect a rancher's interests during a land dispute. Things escalated. Men died." He met Catherine's gaze directly. "I didn't kill anyone who wasn't trying to kill me first, like I told you, but the law in Laramie saw it differently." "So there is a bounty," Catherine said softly. Caldwell wasn't lying about that. No, he wasn't lying. Kellen's jaw tightened. "But the bounty is for Kellen Black, not Kellen Thorne. I changed my name when I came to Nebraska, started fresh." The revelation hung in the air between them. Catherine struggled to reconcile this new information with the man she'd come to care for so deeply. Kellen Black wanted man. Kellen Thorne, the man who'd saved her brother's life, who'd worked alongside them, who'd kissed her with such tenderness. "What will you do?" she asked finally. "That depends," Kellen replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "On you. On me." Caldwell's made his move. "If I stay, there will be trouble, maybe dangerous trouble." Kellen took her hands in his. "I meant what I said before. I have enough money saved to start somewhere new. We could go, you, me, and James. Find a place where neither Caldwell nor my past can find us." "You're asking us to leave our home," Catherine said, her voice breaking slightly. "To abandon everything our parents built." "I'm asking you to choose a future," Kellen corrected gently. "A future with me, if that's what you want. But I won't lie to you, Catherine. Staying here with me will be difficult, possibly dangerous." James cleared his throat. "What if we sold to Caldwell after all? Use the money to start somewhere else, like Kellen says." Catherine stared at her brother, stunned by his suggestion. "James, this land is our heritage, our parents' dream. They wouldn't want us clinging to a dream if it meant putting ourselves in danger," James argued, surprising her with his maturity. "And they would have liked Kellen, I think. Pa always said to judge a man by his actions, not his reputation." Catherine looked between her brother and Kellen, torn between her deep attachment to the homestead and her growing feelings for the man before her. The man who had saved James's life, who had worked tirelessly to help them, who had stood up to Caldwell for their sake. "I need time to think," she said finally. "This isn't a decision I can make lightly." Kellen nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course. But we don't have much time, Catherine. If Caldwell has truly contacted the authorities in Laramie, they could arrive within days. Stay here tonight," she decided. "It's not safe for you to go back to the ranch anyway. We'll talk more in the morning." That night, Catherine lay awake long after James had fallen asleep, her mind churning with the weight of the decision before her. The homestead represented everything her family had worked for, every sacrifice her parents had made. But what good was land if those she loved weren't safe? And when had Kellen Thorne become someone she couldn't imagine her life without? In the pre-dawn hours, she rose quietly and went to the kitchen, intending to make coffee. She found Kellen already there, stoking the stove, his features cast in shadow by the single lantern he'd lit. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, looking up at her approach. Catherine shook her head. "Too much to think about." Kellen nodded, understanding without words. He poured water into the coffee pot and set it on the stove before turning to face her fully. In the soft lantern light, his expression was open, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. "I should have told you everything from the beginning," he said quietly, "about Wyoming, about my real name." "Yes, you should have," Catherine agreed, though there was no anger in her tone. "But I understand why you didn't. A fresh start means leaving the past behind." "Some things can't stay buried forever," Kellen said grimly. "I learned that lesson too late." Catherine moved closer to him, drawn by the pain in his voice. "Tell me now, all of it. I need to know what we're facing if I'm to make this decision." Kellen was silent for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. Then he began to speak, his voice low and measured. "After my mother died, I drifted. Took whatever work I could find, which eventually led me to Wyoming. I was hired by a cattle baron named Everett to help persuade small ranchers to sell their land. I didn't ask questions at first, just did what I was told and collected my pay." He poured coffee for them both, the familiar ritual seeming to steady him. "There was one family, the Hansons, who refused to sell. Everett sent me and 4 other men to burn them out." Kellen's voice grew hoarse with remembered shame. "I'd done a lot of things I wasn't proud of by then, but I drew the line at that. I warned the Hansons instead." "What happened?" Catherine asked softly, sensing they were approaching the heart of the story. "Everett found out, sent the others to deal with me and the Hansons. There was a gunfight." Kellen's eyes met hers, unflinching. 3 of Everett's men died, so did Mr. Hanson. His wife claimed I'd shot him, that the whole thing had been a trap to steal their land." "Did you?" Catherine couldn't help asking. "Shoot Mr. Hanson?" "No," Kellen said firmly. "But it was my bullet that killed one of Everett's men. The others died by Hanson's gun before he was shot. But Mrs. Hanson was distraught, looking for someone to blame, and I was the obvious choice, the outsider with a gun for hire." "So you ran?" Kellen nodded. "Changed my name, drifted east until I ended up in Nebraska. Caldwell hired me 2 years ago, no questions asked. I worked hard, kept my head down, tried to become someone my mother wouldn't have been ashamed of." "And then you met me," Catherine said softly, "and risked everything by getting involved." "And I'd do it again," Kellen said, reaching for her hand across the table. "Meeting you, helping you and James, it's the first truly good thing I've done in years. The first time I've felt whole again." Catherine squeezed his hand, her heart aching for the lonely path he had walked. "Thank you for telling me the truth." "Now you know everything," Kellen said. "And you have to decide if a future with me is worth the risk, worth leaving your home behind." Catherine was quiet for a long moment, weighing all she had learned against all she felt. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, the first hints of dawn creeping through the window. "My parents built this place from nothing," she said finally. "Faced hardship and loss, but never gave up. I always thought that meant I had to stay here, keep their dream alive. But perhaps their real legacy isn't the land itself, but the courage they showed in starting over, in building something new." Hope flickered in Kellen's eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that home isn't a piece of land, it's people, it's love." Catherine took a deep breath. "If Caldwell wants this land so badly, let him have it at a fair price. We'll take James and go somewhere new, start our own story." "Are you certain?" Kellen asked, searching her face. "This is your heritage." "My heritage is here," Catherine said, pressing a hand to her heart. "In the values my parents taught me, in the love they showed me, in the strength they gave me. I can take that anywhere." She smiled softly. "Besides, I think my mother would have approved of my choice. She always said a smart woman knows when to stand her ground and when to change direction." Kellen stood, pulling her into his arms. "I promise you won't regret this, Catherine. Wherever we go, whatever we face, we'll face it together." "Together," she agreed, tilting her face up to his. Their lips met in a kiss that sealed their decision, a promise of a future neither had dared to imagine just weeks earlier. When James awoke, they shared their plan with him. To Catherine's relief, her brother was not only supportive but enthusiastic about the prospect of starting fresh elsewhere. "I've always wanted to see more of the country," he admitted, "and the farm. It hasn't felt the same since Ma and Pa died. Too many ghosts." With the decision made, they moved quickly. Kellen rode into town to speak with a lawyer, arranging for a formal counter-offer to be delivered to Caldwell. $3,000 for the Turner property, not the $5,000 Caldwell had offered, but a fair price that acknowledged their willingness to sell while maintaining their dignity. To their surprise, Caldwell accepted without further negotiation. Perhaps he was eager to avoid any more confrontation, or perhaps, as Kellen suggested, he was satisfied with having won the battle for the land, regardless of the price. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. They sold what they couldn't take with them, packed their most precious possessions, and made plans for their journey. Kellen suggested Colorado Territory, where the mining boom had created opportunities for new settlements, and where neither his past nor Caldwell's influence was likely to follow them. The evening before their departure, Catherine stood in the empty cabin, saying a private farewell to the only home she had ever known. The walls were bare now, the furniture sold or packed in the 2 wagons waiting outside. Yet the memories remained: her father teaching her to read at the kitchen table, her mother singing as she kneaded bread, James taking his first steps across the wooden floor. "Are you all right?" Kellen asked softly, coming to stand beside her. Catherine nodded, wiping away a stray tear. "Just saying goodbye. It's harder than I expected." "We don't have to go," Kellen said, though they both knew it wasn't true. "If you've changed your mind—" "No," Catherine interrupted firmly. "My mind hasn't changed. My heart is just catching up to my head, that's all." She turned to him, drawing strength from his presence. "I'm ready, Kellen, ready for our new beginning." Their journey to Colorado took nearly 3 weeks, traveling at a careful pace to accommodate James, who was still regaining his full strength. The late summer weather held fair, and the rolling plains gradually gave way to the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, a landscape so different from the Nebraska prairie that it seemed almost like entering another world. They settled in a small but growing town called Silver Creek, nestled in a valley with mountains rising majestically on all sides. With the money from the sale of the farm, they were able to purchase a small ranch of their own, 200 acres of good grazing land with a sturdy cabin that, though smaller than their Nebraska home, had potential for expansion. Kellen, free from the shadow of his past and the constraints of working for a man like Caldwell, threw himself into building their new life with a joy Catherine had never seen in him before. He worked from sunrise to sunset, repairing fences, adding a room to the cabin, acquiring a small herd of cattle that would form the nucleus of their ranch. James thrived in the mountain air, his health fully restored by autumn. He made friends quickly in town, particularly with the blacksmith's son, and began apprenticing with a local rancher to learn the cattle business. 6 months after their arrival in Silver Creek, on a crisp October morning with the aspens blazing gold on the mountainsides, Kellen asked Catherine to marry him. They stood on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunrise paint the valley in shades of pink and gold, when he took her hands in his. "I never thought I'd have this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "A home, a purpose, a woman I love more than life itself." He dropped to one knee, offering her a simple gold band. "Catherine Turner, will you marry me?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation, tears of joy welling in her eyes. "With all my heart, yes." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Silver Creek, with James standing proudly as Kellen's best man. The townspeople, who had welcomed the newcomers with typical frontier hospitality, filled the pews, celebrating the union of two people whose love story had begun with an act of kindness in a barber shop doorway. As Catherine and Kellen exchanged their vows, she found herself thinking of that day in Valentine, how close she had come to sacrificing a part of herself, how Kellen's intervention had changed the course of her life in ways she could never have imagined. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss the bride." Kellen drew her into his arms, his kiss a promise of all the days to come, when they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Thorne. Catherine knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. She had lost a homestead but gained a home, lost a heritage but found a future. 5 years later, the Thorne Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous in the valley. Their herd numbered over 500 head, and the original cabin had been expanded into a comfortable home with room enough for their growing family, a 3-year-old son named Thomas, after Catherine's father, and twin girls, Alina and Marie, just celebrating their first birthday. James, now 21 and a respected rancher in his own right, had a small spread neighboring theirs and was courting the schoolteacher, a lively young woman from Boston who had come west seeking adventure. On the 5th anniversary of their arrival in Silver Creek, Catherine and Kellen sat on their porch after the children were asleep, sharing a rare, quiet moment together. The mountain air was crisp with approaching autumn, reminding Catherine of that day in Valentine when a desperate plan to sell her hair had led to an unexpected encounter with the man who would become her husband. "You ever regret it?" Kellen asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Leaving Nebraska. Your parents' farm?" Catherine considered the question, then shook her head. "Not for a moment. Everything that mattered came with us, the memories, the lessons, the love. And we've built something wonderful here, something that's truly ours." Kellen kissed her temple, his touch as tender as it had been on that first day. "I still can't believe my luck, that I happened to be in Valentine that day, that you gave me a chance despite my past." "It wasn't luck," Catherine said softly. "It was fate, or providence. Whatever you want to call it, we were meant to find each other." As the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, Catherine leaned against her husband's strong shoulder, content in the knowledge that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with the smallest acts of kindness. Kellen had once told her to keep her beauty, that he would pay the doctor. In return, she had given him her trust, her love, her life. And in that exchange, both had found a happiness neither had dared to dream possible. "I love you, Catherine Thorne," Kellen whispered into her hair. "More than I have words to say." "And I love you," she replied, her heart full. "Today and all our tomorrows." In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, the sound echoing across the valley. Inside the house, one of the twins whimpered briefly before settling back to sleep. And on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, Catherine and Kellen Thorne sat together, grateful for the twists of fate that had led them from a desperate moment in Valentine to this peaceful evening in their mountain home, where they would watch their children grow, their ranch prosper, and their love deepen with each passing year. Life would bring challenges, as it always did on the frontier, but they would face them together, drawing strength from each other, and from the knowledge that they had already overcome the greatest obstacles, prejudice, danger, and the weight of the past to build a future filled with promise and love. And sometimes, in quiet moments, Catherine would touch her long hair, now streaked with a few strands of silver, and remember the day when a cowboy had told her to keep her beauty, setting in motion a journey that had led her not just to medicine for her brother, but to the richest kind of healing for her own heart.